Okay. All right. So Kevin, if you want to start.
So first thing, I hope everybody had a great Christmas and Happy New Year so far. I think most people survived the cold blast that we had. Hopefully, for some of you guys that had livestock, hope you didn't have too many issues. We were kind of lucky here. Our turkeys were a little bit older when the cold got here, so it wasn't too bad on us. But but hell, I think now we got a high of like 55 or 60 today, so it's kind of weird winter here. Moisture, great moisture. I just seen a drought index, which I kind of disagree with that. I mean, we're pretty wet here, actually. Oh, are you guys pretty wet, Terry?
Oh yeah, we got that 2 inches there last week. And actually, I've got a leaky pond out here and it is full, but it had been dry from the middle of July till now. So yeah. I'm about 100 miles east of Kevin. If some of you guys don't know where I'm at, I'm north and east of Louisville. So we're almost on the same weather line. Kevin gets more rain than I get and brags about it. So,
you're so full of shit.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, all right.
Terry's place is always where the rainbow is.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how great he lives there. But anyway, so this meeting is going to be pretty interesting today. We're going to dive into a little bit more into soils, get into some of not only my opinions, but what we see on our farm. I know there's been several questions about dry fertilizer and some of you guys that are iffy about, dropping dry 100% with a liquid program carry. We'll hit on that a little bit. We had in the first year or the first group, we had several guys. I wish there would have been a few of them guys on there. That was because that was a pretty good meeting last week. And I recommend you guys to go through there and look at that, watch that video, because there's few guys on there now that's been there, 2-3 years now, going on the 4th year now, and they will justify what we're saying with the liquid program. And we'll talk about a little bit about the nutrient uptake of the plants today, and why I say we can get by with a liquid program and actually gain healthy soil, and actually your numbers in your soil normally do go up, because my opinion has always been that the corn plant does not use near what the experts say as far as nutritional needs of the corn plant, because year after year, yes, we do use manure, but we have not used any dry fertilizer to help build our soil profile up. But between our liquid program and a little bit of manure that we put down, and growing essentially 300 bushel corn for 15-20 years pretty consistently, our numbers are climbing. And if you go by the experts supposedly nutrient uptake, we should be losing ground on our soil samples, and we're actually getting higher and higher. But that we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and get growing here, Joe. So, I'm going to just tell you 100% yield comes from soil biology. I mean, I don't care how much fertilizer you put out there. We proved it 2 years ago again on our farm, where we were trying to shoot for the world record on our plot. we actually added about 40 more pounds of nitrogen out there in our contest field, and our yield went significantly down on night just by adding that extra 40 pounds of nitrogen. We overran our biology that we had in our soil, and our yield went down in that field compared to the fields beside it. So, everything we say, that's kind of why we started this liquid program over the years. One, we could cut back on fertility. We're down to that 100 and about a farm average, about 150 pounds of N now across the board if you'd average everything together. And we were hot and dry. Our hills were a little weaker this year just because of the 44 days there with not much rain there. But I think we were still in that 285 farm average. And that includes the river bottoms that flooded in twice at the end of July and twice early in August. So still pretty happy with the farm average, even with the extreme drought early, and then the extreme wetness that we had, that we could still be in that 0.6 pounds of actual N to a bushel on the farm average. So that's where we start making money, pretty serious money by cutting back. Yes, we do spend more on humics and sugars, but year in and year out, we're still able every year to drop back down on our nitrogen needs. And I can't tell you exactly how many pounds to put out there every year, even for us, because when we get in our Y drops, because we base everything off our tissue samples. So that'll be something else we'll talk about a little bit later too. But we had a lot of questions about, I know everybody don't have manure, and I feel like our turkey litter is probably the best stuff for your soil, just because we get a lot of carbon. We use shavings for our bedding, and so yes, we do have it like a cheat sheet with our turkey litter there. But there is other ways to build your soil profile up and your biology, without the aid of manure. And that's one thing we've always been talking about is sugar and humics. You just may have to use a little bit more sugar, a little bit more humics than what we do, but you will change your profile, especially by getting rid of the dry fertilizer, because it's all about your biology, the amount of bugs you get in your soil, and everything that you apply, you have to think about how that's going to affect your biology. We'll have the bee crop guys on, which them guys are the guys that will break down your soil samples, and basically they will 100% agree with what we're saying on the salts and what they see with the biology going on, that it goes side by side with what we say and what we see on our farm as far as yield goes to. You're essentially feeding your soil to feed your crop, and we will talk about, I don't really care about what the P and K numbers are in the soil, just because we'll get on to ours, and I think we'll have our bee crop up there from a couple years ago, and you'll see with our numbers, we should never ever have to apply any P and K by what the quote experts say. And you'll see we have to, just because it's in the soil. And I don't care if you do a Malic 3 or whatever you do to test, what's available. The bottom line is it all has to do with weather. So we can't control the weather. So if we can't do that, we can't guarantee how many pounds of this and that we're getting from our soil. So that's why I say we have to pull our tissue samples and feed the crop that way with commercial fertilizer to make up what our soil will not release. So number two, how do we compensate for not having access to litters or manures to build our soil? We just hit about that. you make it up by humics and sugars. It's so amazing that what we see, not only just the benefits of buffing out the salts that the humics do, but for some of you guys that have not used much humics, but I can just tell you, anytime we load our planter up in the middle of the field, and we'll have a little spill there where we unhook the fittings, and last summer there we had where we filled up 3 or 4 times in that one field in our river bottom. There was probably maybe half a gallon of that spilled in one spot. And we went through that 44 days there with a ½ inch of rain. And where the humics was at, you go down a ½ inch and there was all kind of moisture right there where the humic acids were, were at where we spilled it naturally. But, I think the water holding capacity on a humic acid is like 10-fold of what your soil is. So you get a lot of other benefits, not just buffering out the salts, and you get a lot of water holding capacity out of that too. So let's go ahead to the next one, Joe.
Hey guys, there's a chat on your computers or your iPads, whatever. If you got a question and don't want to ask it, just pull it in on the chat and we'll read it.
So one of the biggest challenges that all of us have is understanding how the soil works. And, that's what Kevin was touching base on here. The heavy load that's done to produce yield and crops and everything every season has to do with the biology under the ground, underneath that root mass. And there are mutualistic organisms, and there's also the bad ones, parasitic. And that's where your diseases and stuff a lot of times come from. So in order to get your soils up and running and help balance out nutrients, pH, water, all that kind of thing, is to flourish, get your whole biology to flourish. And that's what the humics and sugars are meant to do. So it's kind of like what he was talking about. If you've been using dry fertilizer for years and years and years, then we've really got to remediate that salt to get it out of or at least out of the system or lower in the system, so the microbes can work better and faster. So when we're talking about that, the next slide has to do with bacteria and fungi, which is essential in and around, especially the rhizosphere, where the root hairs take up the nutrients in the water and moisture and stuff. So on the left is all the things that they like. So when we do add sugars or carbohydrates and carbon, and even nitrogen as a food source, and then of course a pH range, organic matter, cover crops can add something to it too. But on the right is what is hindering their ability to perform maximum how they want. We know tillage disrupts, we know salts disrupt. Anything that is synthetic to the soil, that's not natural, it's not organic, is a hindrance because they have to overcome it. Even chemicals that we put on are synthetic. They have to eventually digest it, or it's going to affect next year's crop, especially if you're rotating. You can't put a corn chemical on this year and then it not be broken down and digested by the soil biology, and then you put soybeans there the next year. It has to be taken out. And that's what your microbes are also doing, even with chemicals. So here's another slide talking about the forms in which the plants take up the nutrients, and they have to be in this kind of form to be taken into the plant. And here again, your soil biology plays a tremendous role in converting this, because when you throw dry fertilizer out, for example, and it's in a raw salt state, and it's not a plant food yet, but the soil biology has to break that down, turn it into the form in which the plant can take it in and can use it. Otherwise, it's actually a hindrance or a detriment to it. This is why we're talking about, for years and years and years, you put on dry fertilizers, and the co-ops all say, hey, you want higher yield, just keep putting on more. Well, it doesn't turn out to happen that way. but you are increasing your salt levels out there in your soil, which then becomes a hindrance or let's call it a maximum ceiling that your microbes can work in. It's in such a salty condition. So you also see on the right the mobility of those particular nutrients. Then the next thing we run into, which we have such a diversity all across the nation, whether it's high CECs, especially up in the north, or it's low CECs way down in the south, where we're running into sandier and sandier soils. And then a lot of you guys really probably have a mixture of all of these things in different fields that you farm. I know even Brooks has heavy sandy soil, yet Kevin doesn't have that. So it's a dilemma that you have to work around in all of this, but that makes a tremendous impact on the nutrient holding ability that you see here on clay. And then we struggle to keep enough nutrients held on sandy soils. Well, your humics and your sugars will help both type soils or anything in between to help balance it out and help hold nutrients in place for the plant to take in, the root hairs to take in. So again, the importance of the soil biology, it helps tremendously when we're talking about the rhizosphere. Around that, it's that real close microscopic area next to the root hair where everything is transferred, whether it's nutrients or it's enzymes or something like that. And then that turns into, of course, through the plant is root exudates, which we'll look at here in a second. But your biology also contributes to this oxygen level going on in your soil. You've all heard of aerobic, where your soil is operating the way it's supposed to. And if it goes underwater, then the biology turns into anaerobic because they suffocate the aerobic ones and they can't survive. And then the anaerobic ones take over. So when we're looking at that, either way, is this the non-rhizosphere is out here in the, let's just say the bulk between the rows, but everything is happening in that furrow, that close knit area to the root mass. Either way, the soil organisms are always looking for a food supply. So when we do put on nitrogen, that becomes a food supply. They consume it, put it in their bodies. When they die, they release it. This is how you end up getting more stability using the humics and the sugars when applying it to nitrogen. It's because you're increasing your biological numbers to help store it in a natural way, stabilized way, rather than using a synthetic like, I hate to pick on Agritane, but that one's popular, but that is a synthetic product that actually kills off biology to help keep the nitrogen close to the root mass. So again, these root exudates, that's that little drop at the end of the root hair, that is powerful. That has all kinds of signals in it. It's telling the biology in the soil that plant needs whatever. It could be potash, it could be phosphorus, it could be manganese, boron, zinc, and that triggers or that signals the biology that is associated with breaking those particular nutrients down to go get it, break it down, bring it to them. I'll keep feeding you these sugars and carbohydrates and enzymes and hormones if you keep bringing me food. So that's what we're seeing here with these root exudates, and that is powerful. I think to that tune, we're going to get into, this is just a chart in case you're needing it sometime, but these are the deficiency photos of what it appears to be like if you are deficient in that particular nutrient. Some of you may have seen early in the spring when it's cool, the corn crops coming up and the leaves are purple, or at least turn some tinge of purple. That means they're not getting enough phosphorus. So phosphorus always is indicated by purple. Nitrogen always happens down the center, goes to the outside. The opposite is true of potash. It starts on the outside, works its way to the center. And then you can see the rest here in the photos. So, Kevin, you got anything to add before we go to some of the members' stuff?
Well, just what I was told before we went to this program, the liquid program, we'd have P and K numbers of over 600, and it seems like every year we would see that purpling in the leaves there. And and the problem is at that time the co-op would always tell us, oh, it's no big deal, they'll grow out of that, which, yes, he was 100% correct. It did grow out of that, but when we'd see that purpling, we were in that V3, V4, V5 stage, and we were influencing how many rows around that we were making on that, on that ear. So the problem is, how many bushels were we losing by having our plant being deficient on that until we were able to address it with the liquid program. So that's why I don't hold a whole lot of I don't really base a whole lot of yield off of what the nutrients say that's in the soil. When we look at a soil graph error or test, we're more concerned with what's in the plant because, essentially we don't get paid by what we put in the soil. As far as yield, we get paid by what's in the plant. So, my recommendations is, guys, don't base any yield projections off of what you have in the soil, because you don't get paid by that. It's no guarantee what's getting into the plant there. So that's kind of why you got to, look at that and kind of change your thinking a little bit. We get paid by what's going into the plant, so, and that makes a big difference on what products we use. We've used on our farm, we've tested a crap ton. I mean, I don't know, probably over the last 10, 15 years here, guys, we probably tried 15, 20 different P sources, 15, 20 different K sources. There's a reason why we use what we use, because on our ground, that's what we're finding out that gives us not only helps us on our highest yield, but it's our highest ROI. And that's the main thing. Getting a high yield is nice, but we want to make money doing it. So there is a reason why every nutrient that we use, it's why we're buying from either Monty's or somebody like that works, because there is a lot of, like, just for instance, like 1034O, it's a cheap P source, but it's got loaded with heavy metals, a lot of salt in it. It's just not a very conducive form of phosphorus for what we're wanting to use. So like I said, guys, there is a reason why we use what we use. I don't like, some guys in the first year group there was not having really good results, and a lot of their problem was, they were running a liquid program, but they were not using very good clean products. So that does make a difference. If you're going to make the switch and go all in on this, guys, it pays to use good products. So that's just something to keep in mind there a little bit. All right, Joe.
So this is from Mark Belter. I think he is on here today, and he sent this chart in case any of you have an interest in making urea into a liquid form where you can use it. In fact, on the MACC price sheet, you will see a 2300, and that is urea cut in half with water in a form of nitrogen. So the market, and of course, you've got some questions over here to the right. And Mark, if you want to contribute anything, by all means, jump in. So Kevin, if you want to start answering his questions there.
Okay. Can Kevin go over rates of liquid carbon or surge and agri-seed for each pass? So normally there is a rule of thumb that we always use, but to make it simple, like in our 2x2, we'll run like a gallon of each. In furrow, when I say of each, the 2x2 we use the liquid carbon. And then on the in furrow, we use the fulvic, the surge. I think was that a half a gallon we were using in furrow, Joe?
Yeah, pretty sure. Yeah.
But on the in furrow, but the reason why we use the fulvic or the surge in the in furrow, we are trying to drive what nutrients we have in our soil. You know, we pull the regular fertilizer out other than the zinc in our in furrow, but we're trying to drive the nutrients in earlier. And it seems like, you know, we're not trying to buffer as much salts because we don't really run any fertilizer in our in furrow other than sugar and the humics and the zinc, or the fulvic and the zinc. So we switched to the fulvic in furrow, and it seems like we've had a pretty good benefit by doing that. But and then when we get into the 2x2, I mean, some guys, you know, we say run at least a gallon of humic with a sugar. But I mean, if we want to get really technical, guys, I mean, especially guys with higher salt loads in their soils, you know, we normally say, you know, in a perfect world, we would run about, for every 20 gallon of commercial fertilizer, we would run a gallon of humic. So that's kind of what we would tell guys. It's got a pretty high salt load already in their soil. When you pull your soil samples, you know, if you're above that point, you know, 4.5, you need to be running more humics than what the guys with lower salt loads do. So, and then like when we make every pass with our, other than our burn down, you know, we'll run a quart of sugar and a quart of either a humic, depending on what we're spraying. Like we're spraying our herbicides, post spraying there, we'll run a humic. But if we're spraying our fungicides, and depending on if there is any diseases out there that I can visually see, then I will switch to a fulvic on it. But most of the time, anything over the top foliar, as far as a herbicide or a fungicide, we'll be running a quart on each pass with a quart of sugar on every pass there. So so I think I did answer question two there. Then what other recommendations would I make for fields with pH of 6.5 to 7.5? Organic matter 4, CCs 20 to 35, mag 7 to 100. How do these factor affect using LC versus surge for in furrow 2x2 wide drop? So I think what we found out, and Joe, you helped me on this, but the higher the mag load, the more of a mixture of a fulvic we want to run to surge. Ain't that what we decided?
Yeah, correct.
Because
On organic matter soils like this, yeah, correct.
I mean, so the problem is when you, and this is one thing why we preach about, we want low mag. It ties up so many, you know, it's tied in with your calcium's tied in with your your potassium so much. So, you know, we want to have a catalyst to help drive it in instead of kind of buffering and holding it. So, so I would run with high mag, high CECs, high organic matter. You want to run more fulvic than what you are humic. So I think that would, any other questions on that?
I don't know if Mark I let him in. I don't know if he's still on or not, but if you have any questions, Mark, jump in.
I mean, anybody got any questions?
Yeah, Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just had to switch over to truck here. Yeah, I guess those were my questions. I was more wondering on, you know, exactly how much. I mean, I've got all Kevin's ratios down and all that, and just seeing, you know, how aggressive do we get on the fulvic? You know, I mean, should we be half and half fulvic to humic, or in my case, you know, do I need to be 75% fulvic, or what kind is the ballpark you think we should be at?
So the only time I would say for you, if them were your souls there, my last wide drop, I would probably run 3/4 of a humic because, and I'm sorry, okay, you're North Dakota, so you probably don't normally get a whole lot of precipitation, do you?
No, we're probably, you know, 18 to 22, you know,
Yeah,
on
so
average.
you could probably run mostly fulvic, you know, you know, we're like us, we're 40 plus inches of rain, and a little bit lighter soils than what you got. You know, that's why, especially on our wide drop pass, we're going to run all humic on our last wide drop, where you guys could be running, not only because of the rainfall amount, but you got a little bit heavier soil, so it's going to stay naturally a little bit tighter in your root zone than what it would in ours. So, you know, maybe your last pass with your last wide drop, you might be maybe 50-50, actually, more I think about it, 50-50 on your last wide drop. But, you know, your first wide drop and your 2x2, I would probably be running the Surge product through it for you guys, and stay the same rates, you know, like what we say is what we do on our 2x2 and our program there. I don't think, unless you have really high salts in your levels in your soils, I think you'll be fine with with the same amounts that we run.
Yeah, no, my salts aren't too bad. I mean, I put very little dry fertilizer on the last several years, and I think it's, you know, you can already see a change there, and about half our ground is tiled. And then I've actually been, you know, only going about 0.6 on my nitrogen, so that's helped a little bit. And I've also been weaning off of urea. I'll still use a little bit this year on a few fields, but by next year I should be 100% liquid.
Awesome. So yeah, that'd be perfect. And that's what I would run up there then. You know, the only thing I would say a little bit different on our program as far as the fertility, and that has to do several factors. You know, one, your soil's heavier, so your P and K, I would run all that up front on your 2x2, just because of you know, your heavier soil is a little bit harder to move in the profile, less water, unless you have irrigation. I just think from when we did the Hefties field day up there in South Dakota, how much heavier their soils was, we had to change a few things from our operation there. And that's, you know, the first year we did it up there on Hefties, we did not see the responses we did here, and come to find out it was just because the soil was heavier and you didn't have as much rainfall up in that area, that we weren't moving the nutrients, the P and K, through the soil profile nearly fast enough to get it to the roots, is what we do here. So that's the only thing I would say as far as changing anything. I would try to get all my liquid P and K with my 2x2 pass, preferably, if possible for you. But there was a question. Hang on, let me see what that question was. How early do you think it's safe to start wide dropping? So, I mean, I would like to wide drop earlier V4, V5, but you know, I do it just because I do it at V5 just because the corn's big enough where I can run my hoses out, touching the corn and not really breaking any corn off and still able to run 10 mile an hour. So that's why it's normally about V5 in our area for us to run, where we can run with the hoses all the way out. But you know, the problem is when you get down to that V2, V3, you have to run a little bit slower just for that because of the tissue burn and actually knocking corn over if you run your wide drop hoses all the way out. So I mean, we've done some early corn like that. You know, we actually ended up moving our hoses in about, you know, they were probably average. We try to be 2 to 3 inches away from the plant just because of the splash a little bit. So, and that kind of defeated our purpose. You know, we want to try to lay it as, you know, as long as you can get your fertility within 2 to 3 inches of the corn stalk and you feel comfortable with that, where it's going to be right down in your root zone, you know, if you have to wide drop earlier, you can do it. Just know that you have to run a little bit slower so you don't have any of that splashing effect onto the tissue, because it will, you know, if it's done early enough, some of that stuff will kill that corn. So just be careful with that, with the wide dropping and the splashing effect on it, because you can burn the snot out of some of that corn. Okay, so let me move these out of the way here. There we go. Question 1, whether I am a 4th year member or 1st year member, where should I start first to improve my soils and begin to track higher yields? So I always say this: number 1 is tiling. You know, we talk about soil health so much, but you know, the biggest improvement that we see year in and year out, the number 1 ROI in our area is tiling. You know, the quicker you can get that water off in our area, the quicker you can jumpstart your biology again, because, you know, we'll be weeks where, you know, we'll have 2 to 3 weeks there where we could be complete mud. So the problem with that is when you're mud, your soil goes anaerobic and you're not doing nothing. You're not getting any root growth. Your biology shut down. So that plant is basically living off of itself and the reserves that it has in it. So I'd say number 1, tiling is the most important. And to tell you how important it is to us, you know, what we see is, you know, we're pattern tiling the whole farm on 25-foot centers. You know, yes, it is expensive, but we see a very quick ROI on that. You know, normally we have our own tile machine, we lay our own tile, but you know, we figure only about 3 to 4 years and we have our, you know, we paid for the tile. So that's number 1. And then if you have high mag levels or high salt levels, when you try to start flushing the salts and the magnesium out, if you don't have tile in there, you can't flush it out of the soil near as effectively as what you would have a tile, where you could actually flush it into the tile and take it out off your farm. So so that's another big thing. I would have to say, especially in our area, tile would be number 1. Number 2, you know, we got to lower the salt levels, you know, get your pHs correct. You know, you perfect for our area. You know, we want to be in that about 7 to 7.1 when we're planting. And then about the time we get to tassel, we're at about 6.8 on our pH. So, but as far as fertility goes, you know, the main thing is the first thing you got to do is get your pHs correct. You know, if you're down there, if you got soil that's below 6, honest to God, guys, if I would be farming it, I probably would not fertilize it that first year. I would spend all my money on trying to get the pH balance first, because you get below, you get in that 5.5 range, you're over 50% of fertility, or about 50% of that fertility that is not being available to that plant. So just don't make a whole lot of sense to keep on spending money on fertility when, if you can correct your pH right away, you can become way more efficient with 100% of your fertility available if you can just correct your pH there a little bit. So, and then, the sugar and humics is huge. So if you're in, if you've had heavy soils and I recommend everybody needs to pull a soil sample and make sure they put a salt load on it. I would like to see everybody do a bee crop soil sample just for curiosity to see how much bacteria, how much fungi you have, how many different species you have. But I mean, if you have doubts in your mind that if your biology is low, then I would say, start off with a little bit higher rate of sugar and humics the first several years there to jumpstart that biology to get your native biology back up and running. Naturally, you wish you could get manure on there, but if you can't, about the only other way I know how to jumpstart it more would be running more sugar and more humics to build your biology. I am not a fan of buying the bugs in a jug. We tried it for several years there, and the funny thing is the bee crop test kind of solidified my theory on that. When we grew that 400 plus bushel corn there, that was the same year we pulled the bee crop, and not one of the bugs that I bought in the jug was in my soil from the years past. So the problem is you buy them in a jug there. I don't know if it's that our native biology ends up overrunning it from our manure or what, but they just have to, it's a repetitive thing year after year after year. And there's a reason that's going on why that biology that you buy don't stay in our native soil. So I'm just like, well, instead of buying that stuff on our ground, now granted we have manure. Now I'm not saying for guys that don't have manure, and if your numbers are low, that might be something that can help you a little bit until you can build your native biology back up. But I would definitely, over the long haul, definitely wean myself from buying bugs in a jug, just because they don't stay in your soil year after year. They're not native, and anytime that something don't stay native in your soil, I just think that it kind of fights with our natural biology, my opinion. And I'm no soil biologist or whatever, but there's something that's going on why it can't stay year in, year out in the soils, why you have to apply it every year. So that's my 2 cents on the bugs in the jugs there. But so that's kind of answered number one. Number two,
Kevin,
what do you tell members? Do what?
Gotta stop you just a minute. While you were
Yeah.
on that liming and pH, would you back up and tell them about the high calcium lime and not the dolomitic? And
Oh, yeah. So, we hit on a little bit. I'm not a fan at all of magnesium in the soil, or really even in the plant. But so when you buy lime, unless you have soil samples of base saturations of your calcium above 90% and magnesium below, say 6 or 5%, I say, by my opinion, is buy high cal lime. Don't buy the dolomite lime. We don't want, year in, year out, we don't want to see magnesium that high in our soils. I mean, the reason we say that is, you can walk on our ground with high calcium. Our ground is almost fluffy. I guess that's what you would say it. I mean, it's kind of cushiony, the higher the mag you got in your soils, the more compaction you can get, the less oxygen you can get in your soils. And we know that, to grow good roots, to have good oxygen, bacteria, fungi in it, we need oxygen in the soil. So we want to see as much calcium as we can to help keep that ground as much very porous as what it can be. So we would recommend on you guys using a high calcium lime instead of a dolomite lime, unless you're above, if you're above 90% on your base saturation of your calcium, then I say, I still don't want to see you use any dolomite lime. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen soil samples where I said, well, yeah, I would use dolomite lime on this instead of high cal lime. So just our opinion, what we've seen over the last several years. So number two, why do I tell members in most cases stop using dry fertilizer and go over to a total liquid program? Well, one thing about it is, I know most of the time you think it's cheaper, but is it really in the long haul when you're doing some detrimental stuff to the biology? I mean, that's why some guys, that's been running dry fertilizer 50, 60, 70 years, you just can't remediate them soils in 1 or 2 years. That's damage that it does take time to rebuild. So we see it on our farm. I think that's why we're so consistent year in, year out. With the liquid program, we're able to cut back on with the banding with the liquid fertilizer. We're able to cut back on the amount of fertilizer because we're being as efficient as we can. We're putting it basically all right on the roots, and it just, like, the potash is so. I mean, you want to talk about an inefficient fertilizer, especially if you're broadcasting it. Only 7 to 10% of it is available to the plant. So if you're planting on 30-inch rows, and if your roots, it's P and K is really not that mobile in your soil. So, if you're only got 10 inches of root mass out of them 30 inches, so you're already a third less getting to the plant of what you're applying, and then only 7 to 10% of that is available to the plant. So if you're putting 300 pounds down and only 33% of it is getting to the plant, so you're down to 100 pounds that's getting to the plant, and then you're only 7 to 10% of that is actually available. So out of that 300 pounds, you're only down to 7 to 10 pounds of potash that is actually available to that plant. But you still get all the salts that is hampering all your biology across your soil. So now, if you have to continue to use dry, use a humic with it. I think Joe said something about a humahance.
Right.
I would definitely use as much humic acid as I could mixed with it. If you can run an in-furrow, at least run an in-furrow and run some more humic acids with it. You don't want a whole lot of salt right next to that seed trench. So, as far as cut back to percentages, we got several guys now, that are 100% weaned from dry fertility, and their numbers in their soil is hanging. Even guys without manure is hanging right where they were, or actually creeping up a little bit. So what I'm saying is, I know it's hard to fathom getting 100% away from dry fertilizer, but it can be done, and it can be very successful. It's just hard to, I understand, make that leap of faith, but now we're getting into the guys that's been doing it several years now, and their numbers are actually at least holding even, or if not gaining a little bit. But they're also cutting their fertilizer inputs back. So, and I believe the more and more you get your biology, back to where it was naturally, I think you're going to see them numbers start to come up of what's available to your plant overall. So, yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, I'd like to see everybody quit dry fertilizer, but I understand, some places are not able to get liquid, or it is kind of expensive to convert your planters over if you were dry. And hey, we understand that that's farming, but what we're saying is don't feel bad about or scared about jumping over, because we know it and can prove that it does work, and you will help make your soils healthier and healthier year after year by doing a liquid program with sugar and humics that's treating every excuse me, every ounce of the fertilizer that you're putting out there. So the question still remains, when we have such a diverse membership through the nation and many different soils and circumstances, that members grow in from heavy, high organic and high pH soils to sandy, low organic and pH soils. Why does a liquid program provide each of them success? Well, I think one, you're putting everything right in the root zone. So you're establishing, where the corn roots don't have to go out and search for food. You're placing everything there. You're putting all your sugars and your humics right there in the root zone. So you're making basically a perfect habitat for that root zone, no matter what soil types are. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we see. I mean, you're by adding the humic acids in your root zone, you are changing your organic matter and your CECs right there in the root zone. So I mean, we've seen it where some guys are down to 3 and 4 on the CECs in their root zones, and they go out there, after a year or two of applying 4 to 5 gallon of humics, that root zone may be 12 to 15% on the CECs. So you can change, and that's the whole idea of changing right where you're planting your crop, right there in your root zone. And that's why we like the liquid program. I really, all I use them other 20 inches in between my rows is water holding capacity. That's all I use it for. I don't treat, other than spreading manure. And the only reason I spread the manure broadcast is I just can't find a way to band all my manure in strips, or I'd be banding all my manure in strips too. So, but the 20 inches in between the rows where my roots don't reach, I don't really care about that, because I'm feeding right there at the plant to be as efficient as what we can.
Kevin, you might
So-
mention to these guys, your GPS system where you're actually trying to run in that same zone year after year.
So, yeah, so the GPS is, even though we got Case, which they're not, I hate to say it, not as good as the John Deere, but that'd be the first time you ever hear me say that, Terry. So you better
Yeah,
live
you-
it up there.
At every meeting, and we just all soak it in.
But so, we try to just move 2 inches back and forth every year. I know you're not going to be perfect, and but since I've went to this liquid program, if you could be, within 2 or 3 inches of where you planted last year, and we're corn on corn. So, you're never using 100% of fertilizer the year before. You're not scavenging everything that you put out there. So the good thing is, when you come back in that close, your roots are down there, trying to scavenge whatever you left from the year before. So that's one thing that we try to do too. And I think that helps us too, that we move back and forth every year, 2 to 3 inches, left, right, back and forth every time. Try to stay in that one hot zone where, over the last, 15 years, within probably 8 inches, we've probably have put close to 50 gallon of humics down in there. And I think that's, another reason why, year in, year out, we're so consistent, that we've created a really, really nice, happy habitat for that corn plant every year. So, hang on, I got a question here. Have you found a strip till system that can lay a strip? Well, it just went away. Can lay a strip on top of corn rows from a previous year. I run a soil ward. I have to move 10 inches to build a strip. So no, I haven't. So kind of what we do, with our river bottoms and our creek bottoms and being corn on corn, we got so much residue. So we run a disc ripper on most of our ground, river bottoms, especially our river bottoms and our creek bottoms. But then we'll pull our, if we're coming back in and making strips in the spring with it, we'll pull our SIM card off and put it in. But, if coming in, if we don't disturb the stalks with a disc or a ripper, I really have not seen a strip till machine that can get through the big root wads good enough to say I would be comfortable planting right over the top of it. If we're going right on top of the same row as the year before. So to answer that question, no, I haven't, Wes. Not yet. No, we're still looking, but no, we have not found one that could be good enough to have a good seed bed so you can plant in for the next year. So like I said, we ran the Soil Warrior and even Brooks, and we're even two different soil types. I know Brooks can't do it either. So we're still looking too, Wes. As soon as we find something out, we'll let you know, bud. Okay, so question 4, why do you stress the membership to at least try your program completely in a separate field or plot and stop in many cases applying dry fertilizer or stop using high salt liquids like 1034-0? So for one, you can't fix everything in 1 year. I don't care who you are. Now you can remediate if you have manure, you can, especially like a turkey litter or something like that. Or a layer manure, egg layer manure is really good too. The problem is with, I'm not real familiar with the big cattle feedlots because there's not really many of them around here, but there's hog manures around here. But the problem with the hog manure is you don't get a whole lot of carbon, and there is a huge number of salt in the manure there. So with the turkey litter, not only do we get the nutrients from it, but we also do get, almost out of every ton, we're getting over 1,000 pounds of carbon from our wood shavings in it too. So that's really why I love turkey litter now, is because you get so much carbon with it too. So, but the 10 acres, I think, you need to have a year, 2 years, 3 years. Because like I said, the main thing is I don't care how much manure, how much humics, it does take time. I mean, you go out and put 100 gallon of humic acids out there, and you're not going to fix the 50 years of damage that we've done before. So, the good fertilizers we're saying, switch to the good fertilizers in that, run it to a T, give it 2 or 3 years, and you will see. I mean, I'm basically guaranteeing that you will see a huge difference in your soils just by doing that, in 2 to 3 years. Poe Farmer, he was in our first year group. He's been in it now 3 or 4 years, 4th years now, and he's actually seeing now, his base saturation of his K is coming up, his calcium base saturation is coming up. Now, granted, he did not see his farm yield average go up this year, But he was in a big drought. But comparing to his neighbors running the dry fertilizer, he was 50, 60 bushel better than what his neighbors were that were running the conventional dry fertilizer. So it took him, 3 to 4 years for him to really start seeing his soils change. So, and now he started on manure. He ran a little bit last year, but this year he's getting more acres running. So you can figure 3 to 4 years to really start seeing things change where you can actually see it on your soil samples and your tissue samples now. Let's hope he has a decent year of weather here and he can actually see it on his farm average on his farm. But is this pose here?
Yeah.
So
That was
you can,
2019 on the left to 22 on the right. That's that one. And here's the
And-
next.
and that was
Yeah.
with zero potash put out there. That was just sugar, humics, and the liquid program.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. All I see is Joe Deadman on there.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
Okay. So why does some members not see success? They want raising your yields, especially the first year. Well, I think we kind of hit on it. The guys, I'm gonna talk about the wares, and Terry could probably fill you in a little bit better for what they've done, but they've had success from year one, right? Terry Wishmeyer's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, guys, we got the Weirs out in Nebraska, and they are on a fall strip till liquid program, and I think they're putting some P&K down in the fall. But they started, of course, they're on the big quarters out in Nebraska, mostly all irrigated, and they had been using a sugar QLF. It's a molasses product. They'd been using it probably 3 to 4 years before, but they went into our program, and at the end of the year, they were just excited as could be. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Terry said the MACC program made us 35 bushel more in 1 year than we'd ever done before." And so they was really excited. I thought, man, I said, this is a successful story, but it's probably just an isolated case for maybe, we hope to help you 10 bushel maybe the first year. So he's 35 bushels. So he goes to the second year. He goes into his bean acres because he's a 50-50 rotation. And he comes back and says, "Hey, you made me 25 to 30 bushel extra on this." So we're talking 1,800 acres on corn crop each year. So that's a significant increase in yields. And I sort of think that they already had a starter. They had already got their biology up where it needed to be. And guys, when you walk in the coffee shop and you talk to your neighbors and everybody, well, I got 250 and I got 70 on beans and corn. And next guy, same thing. We feel, and hopefully you're listening to this and understanding that Kevin says that the carbon and the biology is holding a lot of these guys back. That's the reason why all of us that you talk to has got the same yield plateaus. And some of you guys, I know we got some new members here I've talked to that's already on manure programs, and we think you're headed the right way. But there's just a whole lot of significance in the biology that you've got in your soil already started. So the Wishmeyers up here in Jackson County, Indiana, they're just north of me, and this is starting their 4th year. And Brian called me here a month ago, just all excited. He said, "Terry," said, "we have beat our high average across all our corn and soybeans by 20 bushel on our corn. And we did this in not as good a corn year." So to me, that is a significant increase in yield in her third year. And Brian was one of these really good farmers that would run the program. His tissue samples, he'd call me up every year before the program ever started and said, damn, Terry, he said, I just can't get these tissue samples to increase. So along with his yields, his tissue samples have increased. So, you know, we're gonna challenge you guys to get in this program. And Kevin really hasn't started with some of you. Some of you's probably heard and seen the program, but his program on tissue testing is a second to none. He's a guru at getting these things balanced out. And, you know, some of you is going to try to come to our in-person meeting tomorrow. You know, you'll be able to meet up with some of the guys that's already been in the program, and we're going to dive into some of these guys' programs and see what really has happened over the years. So go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so I think some of it is, you know, and believe me, guys, we understand farming. You know, there's sometimes that this program does the what we're saying, it does take time. You know, it's not a one shot and done by any means. You know, it's not just the feeding the crop throughout the year with the Y drops, or if you got to fertigate, but it's the fungicides. You know, we want to keep that plant as healthy as possible. So I think why part of some of the guys that don't have the success, they're not going to basically AT on the program, you know, and I understand it. You know, time is its essence, but you know, this program, you know, there's a reason why it's the way it is. You know, it takes time. You know, we're not a huge farm by any means. We don't farm a whole lot of acres. We're 100% family farm here, and you know, and we don't have that many acres. That's part of the reason why we can do all this. But you know, I always say this, especially if some of you guys have never been down here where I farm, we don't have, you know, we're not exactly where you think growing corn would be at. You know, we got a lot of hills, we got a lot of patches. You know, it's just not a very farmer friendly place where we're at. So we actually gave up about 400 acres in 2016 of rent where we could concentrate more and more on our total farm average. You know, in 2017, with 400 less acres on our farm, we had the best farm average we ever did. I mean, not only the best farm average, but we had the most gross bushels we ever did with 400 less acres. So, you know, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that we can get if we do manage the crop the way we should. That's what I'm saying. So for us to manage the crop right, we had to give up some acres to do it. You know, and the good thing was it was the furthest farm that we had. It was on Billy Goat Mountains that we were farming, and you know, and in a nutshell, we were kind of concerned about losing 400 acres, but you know, looking at our farm now, that's 400 acres of rent we're not paying. That's 400 acres of seed we're not buying, fertilizer, hauling, and still growing as many bushels as what we did totally with 400 less acres. So, so I think that's what it is. A lot of it has to do with, you know, and not using the right products, you know, like I said, 1034-0, yeah, you know, guys are saying, well, we're putting, you know, a liquid program out, but you know, there's a reason why we use the 924-3 instead of the 1034-0. Yes, the 1034-0 may be cheaper, but if you break it down, what's available to the plant, you're actually getting more that's available to the plant from the 924-3, and then you don't have the salt and all the heavy metals mixed with it. So it's all about availability to the plant, and that's what we're trying to get everybody to think about. You know, it's more about the availability, and if you get more available to the plant, you don't have to use as much. That's why you can cut back year in and year out, year after year. by priming your soils and doing stuff the correct way. So, got any questions yet, guys? All right.
So here's some
Questions. So,
tissue analysis from Jim Carr out in Iowa. We didn't get to these last week, so we can send Jim the recording.
so I don't know what
Well,
we're
Kevin,
actually trying to.
let me give you a little bit of history on this, Mr. Carr. I think that basically what he's done here, he split a field and he ran your program and he ran his program. And yes, he did have a little complaint. The man, he was in his first year. And what we're seeing here is his plant tissue from the two different sections of ground. And I talked to him here, and hopefully, like I said, he'll get this recording, but I want you to relate what you see is reason why he didn't increase his yields. I've got an idea what it is, but I'd like for that to come from you.
Well, I'm just kind of looking here. I don't know if he ran the program to a T, but
Well, the phosphorus kicked out to me that we have a 0.4, 0.45 on our phosphorus that we try to adjust to. And he said he had been growing, 250 bushel corn, and I'm sure he can. But looking at those phosphorus levels, I don't think he's to the point where you want him at after the first year. Wouldn't that be a concern of yours?
yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at across the board there. The big thing is the mag is so high. So that's tying. I'm looking at the K, and if you're at V8 and the calcium is low, in a perfect world, we want to try to stay above a 1 on our calcium, but there goes the magnesium. The magnesium is so high, and I don't know what the super is. That ours? Is that our program? I guess I don't know what the super, the regular.
Yeah, that is our program, but he did not use any of our products. He bought locally.
Okay.
And I think what he told me he was doing there in the spring was he had to co-op or whoever his supplier was, just bring out humic, sugar, and a starter fertilizer in a big tank. So this was not really our program, but he tried to mimic the program with what he had, and it had one wide drop application.
I mean, I really, I don't know where to start, just because of, so we'll compare this to the numbers that we're wanting at about V8. The nitrogen, we want to be above a 4 or 5 yet, and at V8. Phosphorus, we're still about a 0.4, 0.45, somewhere around there. We want to be above we want our phosphorus actually to be a little bit higher than our nitrogen. And then the K, that should be in line with our nitrogen. So the K, we want to be at least a 4. And if he's at V8, knowing it, the way the nutrients fall when we start hitting, the P and K starts dropping once you get into that, R2, R3, going to be pretty deficient on them as far as the tissue samples. But I think a lot of it, I mean, what really makes zero sense out of this is why his magnesium level on our program is higher than, there's something else going on here that don't make sense, because we're not putting any mag out. If you're running it with a good humic, you should actually be driving on your tissue sample. You will actually see a difference in the magnesium should be lower. 99.9% of the time where we see guys run humic acids in the 2x2, that is the big thing that we can see. You will drive naturally the humic acids down. So some of this just, I mean, really a lot of it don't make any sense to me. Why across the board, other than the boron, and the zinc, which the zinc's only one number higher, why it would be lower than what's the normal program is. I mean, the boron would normally be just off the program because he should have had a Y drop in on it. You know, that boron with a 2-gallon shot should be 40 to 50 on that, and the zinc didn't respond. So it would be interesting to see, you know, we're not seeing the whole sample here. Need to see some soil samples and see what's going on, because I mean it makes 100% no sense why N, P, and K, calcium's even lower, which makes 0 sense. Sulfur's lower, makes 0 sense. You know, we need to see some soil samples with this and see what's going on. You know, what the pH is, and because I'm just telling you, it's got me buffaloed. I mean,
Yeah.
So
Hey,
liquid program.
I
He
agree
sent-
with, go ahead.
he
Go ahead.
sent 2 more tissue samples. Let's see if they're running the same way. Here's the second one.
Yeah, I sort of agree with Kevin here on this. When you guys, if you want to send these in, we're glad to go over them at the meetings. But when they look a little controversial, make sure you do send a soil sample along with them so we can see where your pH is, because not knowing, you know, we've sort of thrown this in front of Kevin, and there's too many unknowns right here. Go ahead, Kevin.
So I'm guessing this is probably the same farm, same spot, just earlier.
I think so. This is V6. And
And the
this
other one was
one,
V8.
no, it's V4, and the first one was V8. So here's V4.
Okay.
So early on, yeah, he had a few higher numbers.
Yeah, his P is higher.
But look at the calcium. I mean,
Yeah.
guys, calcium is one that that is such a huge critical nutrient. And it just makes 0 sense to me why the calcium, I mean, we need to see some soil samples here, what's going on.
Yeah.
And then number 2, if it comes from the same farm, what went on? What is making the magnesium go from a 0.14 to at V8 to being at a 0.25? That really is a mystery to me. Joe, you got the V6 there? Go back to the V6 there.
This is V6.
Okay. So, 39. See, the K is dropping. The mag, see, hell, the mag went up to 0.27.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other thing I could be thinking of, if he ran a fulvic, maybe he's jarring some of them heavier metals loose, maybe. You know, I don't know. I can't answer this. I hate to say this, but you know, the P and K dropping that much, you know, when you pull your first soil sample or your tissue sample, you know, if you're pulling at 300 GDUs, guys, most of that is coming off your seed. So, but here he's far enough now, you know, he should be getting to that, you know, the 2x2 should be pumping that high, and why the P and K is dropping that fast from, I know you're going into rapid growth, but you know, go back to the V4, Joe.
Okay.
It just seems like a pretty big drop. I mean, a drop from V4 to V8 on his P and his K. And that really shouldn't be making sense. Where's he from? Well, it's Iowa there.
Yeah.
I mean, if he had a good source of P and K, I mean, in Iowa, you know, I don't know where his farm is, but just knowing some of the dirt in Iowa, hell, that should just now be, releasing once he gets into that V6, V8, that should just start coming into being released. And then P and K numbers should be coming up instead of dropping like that. So
Yeah.
I'd like to see some soil samples on this so we can dive into it a little bit better. But
Yeah, we'll have to ask him for that. So you got Blake, and he's got soil sample on top and his tissue sample on the bottom, same field.
okay. But I wonder where the tissue samples are in that field was taken from.
I don't
One,
really know.
2, 3, 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
all pretty consistent. The pH is pretty strong right there. So that's hampering him quite a bit. But actually with that high, with being tied up, actually his numbers for that strong a pH is not horrible. I mean, it's actually pretty good for that high pH being tied up
Yeah.
that much.
And
see
see,
what is
this
his
soil
ratio.
sample provides info like you said way back earlier. Look at your pH. Here's one way down here at 5, and the rest are in there's a few in low 6s, but anything in 5, look at the 4, 9. You're not going to get super production when that pH is dropped down like that. You only get like you said, like maybe 50% conversion.
So don't you think
Yeah,
that
so
number 1 and 2 are what the tissue samples are representing?
It could
that's
be.
probably why he's got them highlighted. Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, guys, I mean, actually, they're actually for that pH, they're actually pretty decent tissue samples, actually, for being that much tied up. Let's see what the ratios are. The K is kind of out of, the P's a little low. I mean, that's not bad until you get down to, once you get down to 1,000, it starts getting out of whack with your nitrogen. We always want our phosphorus to be a little bit higher than our nitrogen and our K, but let's see, our zinc to phosphorus. I wonder if that 1,000 GDU zinc number is wrong. That's goes from 38 to 123 to back to 25. So I'm guessing there's probably an issue or whatever that boron number maybe that's boron. Yeah, that's boron.
They're all at an angle here.
Yeah. So that's boron. So 1,000, that might have been at his he might have had a V10 application error that might have come up, but it dropped pretty quick. Well, which you probably could, depending on if he's got much in his soil. Let's see. I don't have boron on the soil. But I could see that, if you don't have much boron in your soil, you make a V10 application, you jump up, it goes through it. But normally, that 1,500 GDU boron number should be, if he's at 123 on his 1,000, he went through the big pull of the pollen shed. I would still have to guess normally you would see that boron if he was at 123, he would still be in that 40 to 50 range, just because of the plant don't use as much boron after that. So,
and then this is a picture that he sent us on where he did the composite out between the rows. He pulled the sample, same field, and then he pulled one in the root zone, so he'd have some kind of comparison.
well,
They're somewhat similar.
Well, but you look, that was pulled in December.
Yeah.
So it would be neat to see, even in December, yeah, you do see a little bit carryover yet. But if you go over and look at the K is up a little, the mag is down. So actually where he was pulling on the right even then, and is this his first year or was that his first or second year in this
Second.
group?
Thank you.
Second.
Second.
Second. So actually the mag in season or in the root zone dropped at almost 1.5, a little over 1.5 on the base saturation, which the calcium went down 0.3, but the K went up a little bit. So he is starting to change that a little bit, driving that mag down. Go back to the other one there that you just had, the other soil sample. I'll just kind of just want to look at the base saturations on here. $54. Okay. All right, you're good. Go ahead. Just curious there looking. I'm just wondering if that was pulled in the same spot, because you look at the base saturations on this page here, he's at 54 and 50. If that's where he pulled the soil samples on the next one that you had.
Yeah, but see, this one is on 10/22/20, so that we're a couple years
Yeah.
apart.
Yeah. So if you go back to then, hell, he raised his calcium up 10 points
Yeah,
on his base saturation.
yeah.
That may be what he's trying to portray here. I don't think Blake saw. Yeah.
Okay,
So
all right. We're ready to go back. A few more questions.
yeah. When you apply fungicide, you use the different growth stages and timing. What are you trying to do in the plant that will affect your high yield? So I am a huge proponent for the V10. There's so much that's going on for that V10, and we don't use a generic fungicide. So at that V10, even though we make multiple passes, we use Veltima at V10, and the reason is that I use that, one, for the disease side. So tar spot and southern rust has been around us now and around our farms, not on our farm, but neighboring farms now. Last 3 or 4 years, we've seen tar spot and southern rust is basically every year. So where we make the V10, and normally we make 3 applications, but where we feel like we start our program at V10, one is you get the ear leaf. We get the best coverage we can get on that ear leaf at V10. And then depending on how late a planting we got, how bad the diseases are around, we can apply up to the first time we see a tassel. Our second application can be at the first tassel that we see, or brown silk, depending on what kind of year we got with diseases. And then from that second application, we're normally about 3 weeks after with our third application. And the reason I do that, guys, is one, the Veltima at V10, one, we get the ear leaf. Number 2, there's enough strobies in there yet to help the respiration through tassel. Okay. As far as the plant respirating, helping to minimize the ethylene production. Now, if we are extremely hot like we were this year and we were dry, we move that up to where we seen the first tassel this year and sprayed it again, because we were dry under pretty heavy stress with the corn. So we use that, fungicide as or with the strobies in there to help reduce the ethylene production. I mean, if you don't use a sea salt or seaweed extract to help, you can use a fungicide. The only other way a corn plant gets rid of the ethylene is through the roots. So, and that's why another reason why we're saying calcium is so huge we want to carry high calcium loads in the plant because the higher the calcium levels, the bigger the highway is in the plant to pull the ethylene production down in the plant to the roots. I mean, the corn plant don't respirate ethylene production. It has to be extruded through the roots. So that's why calcium is so huge. But then we come back, like I said, 3 weeks later with another shot of a good fungicide just to keep that plant healthy all the way through. I mean, if it gets a disease on that leaf, on that vein, wherever it dies off, that vein is done. It won't send no sugars, no carbohydrates, no photosynthesis through that leaf, that vein. Essentially, that is a dead vein. So it don't do you any good to feed that plant and do all this other stuff if you let a disease come in there and take it over. So fungicides is a huge thing in our area that we firmly believe in fungicides to match in with our program. Any questions on the fungicides? Okay. Why do you choose to take the 924-3 starter out of the in-furrow and use more humic and sugar and zinc? So I think actually that the early phosphates that we see, we put in there with our higher soils, phosphates in our soils that is available. We don't see an ROI. We've not seen an ROI anymore with the 924-3 in it. I think actually you can get too high right at planting of the load nutrient level of the phosphorus. And I believe you will, how do they say this? You will make your biology lazy. Does that make sense? By having that it don't have, if you have all that food right there, it seems to be lazy. And then whenever you start needing that big pull of phosphorus, your microbes will be lazy and they can't kick back in. So the zinc, I've always ran zinc, and the reason I run zinc is because of our high phosphorus levels. And number two, we're trying to balance our zinc to our phosphorus on our tissue samples. So depending on how high a level of phosphorus that you have in your soil, that will depend on how much zinc I put out. So, our rule of thumb is if we have below 200 in our soil samples, we will run 1 quart. If we go to 400, we're running 2 quarts. And if we're above 400, we go up to 3 quarts of zinc, just to try to balance out our ratio from the word go on that. Because it seems like if you get out of whack early, it is really hard to get that ratio back in with the zinc to the phosphorus. So that's kind of why the zinc. And the reason we use more sugar or humics or fulvics in furrow, we are trying to jumpstart as much biology as we can early, to try to promote as much root growth as we can early. So that's kind of why the biggest promoter that we see on root growth is actually the sugar and the humics. I mean, we've tried a bunch of other products to PGRs even, and we just don't see the benefit as what we do running a higher load of sugar and humics. So that's kind of what our program, why it's running what it is. That's essentially why we're doing what we're doing, for that reason. Number 3, help us understand more about your thinking on front loading the crop with the 2x2 mix when you use, and what helps you determine what to change from one year to the next. So kind of the reason why we run what we do is, we farm in Southern Indiana. We could be super saturated for a long time. We may not be able to get in there at V5, may not be able to get in there till like V8. That was 2 years ago. We couldn't get in there on on Sean's till we were almost V10 on my wife's there. And I just want to make sure that we carry a heavy enough load that I am not cutting yield by my plant running out of fertility up front, because up front is where you can, you're determining, rows around V5, V6, you're starting to determine ovule length at V12. So, if I can't get back in there just because I apply something at say I come in with my first Y drop, we were wet, and I finally get in there at V8. That don't mean that as soon as I Y drop it at V10, it's going to be back into the plant while I Y drop it, because that's going to depend on weather. So that is why we carry such a big load, that it'll buy us some time to be able to get back in there without losing any yield if we can't get back in there at our ideal time. So we're basing everything, and we got years and years of data on this. That is why, we got a rough idea. It's not perfect every year, because like I said, it does change a little bit with the weather. Like this year, for instance, after we planted, we had a rain, we got really wet, and then all of a sudden it turned to 95 degrees and we kind of hit a flash drought. And then we went 44 days with only a ½ inch of rain. So we went through the V5 Y drop and the V10 Y drop with really no rain to incorporate the nutrients to make them 100% available. And which was kind of a, it did kind of suck, because I think we did lose a little bit of yield because of the Y drops there. But the good thing is that we learned that the humics did their job. They stabilized the zinc, the boron, the manganese, the sulfur, everything. That once we finally got a rain July 7th, then boom, our tissue samples jumped back up, and we didn't add any more. We didn't come back in at that rain and Y drop anymore. So we did learn that if you run enough humics in it, you will stabilize it even through a drought there. So that was pretty interesting to see. And I think we got a question. If it is wet and the first Y drop is delayed, will you ever combine the second Y drop applications? So I'm still basing that off of my tissue samples. Now, this is why I say it's so important, because, the program that we give out, guys, it's taken us, 10, 12 years to make this program for our farm. And that's why not everybody's soil is like mine, CECs or organic matter. And that's why it's so important for you guys to write down what you apply, when you apply, what it does for your tissue samples. So if my numbers are good and I can look back, say next year, say 2023, we have the identical year we had this year, which that never happens, but I will not change my program from what I ran the year before. Now, let's say, because once you're dry, it's not like being super saturated. If you're super saturated after you, say I Y drop at V5 and then in comes a big bad front and we stay super saturated for 2 weeks, I'll go back and look at my old tissue samples or try to find the same weather pattern and see what my tissue samples did with what I applied over them years. I'm not saying we will run, if we get to V10, I'm not saying I will make that my V5 and V6 mixture. Say we're going to run, at V5, we ran, say, 20 gallons of 32, and then at V10, we're at 25 gallons or whatever we're at. I'm not going to run 45 gallons on my one Y drop. I will probably cut it back to probably depending on what the tissue samples are, but we'll probably be in that 30 to 35 gallon. Because I know that it has, being that wet, we probably did lose some fertility through being super saturated. So, but normally, yeah, if we get the V10 and being especially under super saturation, to answer your question, we will not add both of them, just because I've never seen an over application ever benefit at V10 of like running a high load of 40-50 gallon for us on our farm. I think we just overrun our biology with that much at one time. That's what I see. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but you guys are gonna have your own track history where you could track that. Once you get 3 or 4 years of this program down, and you'll be able to base that off of what your tissue samples, and you will know exactly how much to put down there depending on what your weather is. I mean, that's what's kind of neat. We can go back year after year and get a pretty close ballpark idea of what the weather is, and we can see what we applied on a wet year to a dry year or whatever, and be pretty close without wasting any money on fertility. But I will say this: if you over fertilize, it is as bad as under fertilizing. So, if you run over your biology, if you get too much nitrogen out there and you don't have enough carbon, that's probably most of the guys' highest or biggest issue too. Once you start chasing these yields, and that's kind of mind-boggling on some of these other guys that have reported some of these other extremely high yields. I think one of the bigger benefits we have, we've got a huge supply of carbon going out there, and I'm just trying to wonder how they're making these yields by not supplementing large amounts of carbon out there for that ratio. It's just another thing that just makes me wonder on some of these yields out there, that how they're doing it, if they are doing it, just because of the carbon factor. Most of them guys don't have enough carbon out there to grow that kind of corn. So what I'm saying is, you will not grow 350 bushel corn by putting a gallon of carbon out. That's not enough carbon. I'm just telling you, it can't happen. It won't happen. I mean, I've seen tissue samples my whole life, and seen soil samples, probably 5,000 of them in the last 10 years. And that's one thing that will show up, guys that grow a really high yielding corn has a lot of carbon in their soils. So just keep that in mind, and it just goes hand in hand.
Yeah. I think one thing, guys, that we might look at as a group, Kevin and I have looked at them over the several years, and there's 4 nutrients that just about every member is short of on your tissue samples when they're growing their corn. That would be potassium, sulfur, zinc, and boron. And so being that everybody's got that problem, I want you guys to be, when you start doing this tissue sampling, you're, like I said, you will not fix all these things in 1 or 2 years. It's going to take time. There's reasons why some of those things are low, but that is the 4 nutrients that we see as being short in everybody's tissue samples. Go ahead, Kevin.
You probably throw phosphorus in there too, so that's why we're saying that's why it's so important to pull tissue samples, so you can see what's going on, what you apply. I mean, I've never figured that out, why you would throw stuff out there and you're not being able to see what it's doing to the plant. The soil is one thing, saying you can put it out there, but until the plant picks it up and gets it into the plant, you don't know what you're putting out there is doing any good. So that's a big reason why everybody should be pulling tissue samples there, so you can actually see what you're spending on is getting into the plant, because that's what you get paid for. You don't get paid for what's in the soil, you get paid for what's in the plant. So, where are we at here? Oh, and what determines that to make a change from one year to the next, our program. So we're really, there's just a few things, a little minor things year in and year out. And what I'm trying to do now is, I'm trying to, what to say here, try to fine tune, I guess, certain nutrients on a tissue sample that I think can drive, to drive some yield up. I mean, once you get to, 300 plus bushel corn, I mean, you better have a lot of things in line, or Mother Nature. You can grow 300 bushel corn with Mother Nature working with you. Big thing is stay below 70 degrees at night. Stay away from the 95 plus degrees during the day. But if you cool off at night, the weather can gain you good rainfall. You can gain 50 to 70 bushel real easy just by weather, running any kind of program. Everybody's seen it. They had really good year. Well, what was the thing? You had really good weather. But to be consistent year in and year out, we were off, from our farm's top end, we were 50 bushel off of last year from our highest NCGA. But, the farm average was really good, even with the drought and the flooding that we had late. But I think that's just because we had a high nutrient load in our plants. I think our disease package, but once you get above that 300, and especially above 350 bushel, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you're just fine tuning. I mean, you're only going to gain, I'm going to say this, guys that are gaining, once you're above 330, 340 bushel, and they're gaining 30, 40 bushel after that, year after year, no offense, I got to call bullshit on that. I mean, it just, yeah, I
Don't happen.
mean, it just don't happen. I mean, it is that hard to get bushels. So, the heat is the biggest thing, in our area, the heat is, and you look at some of these guys' heat, they got more heat than what we got. And you look at the whole Midwest, it doesn't matter who you are, what farming practice you had, everybody in the Midwest was down. And it's just one common denominator that nobody can figure out is how to negate what the heat does. I mean, you can, we're proving that even with the high nutrient loads in the plant, we still can't, it just pulls so hard on that corn plant to cool itself and try to put an ear out there. It'd be like you trying to go out at 95 degrees and work as good as what you can work at 70 degrees. You can't do it unless you're 20 years old. 20 years old, it don't affect you near as much, but it still does affect you. That's why you never see Terry. I mean, it gets 85 degrees. He's in the air conditioner every day. I mean, it's just the way it is on it.
I come to visit you.
Yeah. We sit in the shop, but so that's kind of. So how am I measuring that? So the B crop was the actual only true way that, I shouldn't say the actual true way. I'm sure there's other ways out there, but we were running and we actually got it through our Far Best turkey farm. We have to send in a sample. We are a confined, we have enough birds there where we're a confined feeding operation, and we have to send off soil samples to them, and I'll have to get the lab. I will find that lab for you guys next year, that they've been testing the soil, the carbon in the soil there for about the last 10, 11 years. I'll find out who they are running it through, but we have to send soil samples through them because they take care of all of our state and federal regulations. We just send stuff to them. They have somebody hired there to make sure we're being adequate on our soil samples where we apply manure, staying in compliance. So I will find out who that company is and where you can send them, but the one we know offhand is the bee crop here, but we'll find out that name of that other company. So all we see is just an analyzed printout of what's here and there, but I'll get that company there for you guys. All right, so where are we at now? Okay.
4.
If you had a field high, do
Is
what?
it 4? Is it number 4?
Okay. If you had a field high in P&K or any other nutrient, how would you begin to balance or remediate the soils to improve each for soil production? So, basically what we're doing, high sugar, high humics, the high P, you're trying to, actually the higher the phosphorus is, and that's kind of a pain in the ass, truthfully, once you start getting so high in these levels, it begins tying everything else up. So, that's why we run such a high load of zinc on our soils. But the sugar and the humics lower the salts, because Mother Nature will, once you start getting her able to work in harmony, she will do a lot of the balancing out. So the sugar and the humics would be what I would run to help balance that out. She'll help free up stuff, get the salts, you help get rid of them heavy metals, help free up some of the stuff that's in your soil that's tied up. So sugar, the common denominator, what we always say is sugar and humics. That should be one thing that you guys get out of this. Sugar and humics, no matter what you do, should be one of your most important things you do, run sugar and humics. You change your program to begin to include manganese added to Y drop time. Why do you think this is helping your yields? So I think there's a couple things that the manganese does. I seen it on water retention in the plant. So with us being non-irrigated, the plant itself can hold a little bit more water. So naturally, if you're in the heat, what happens to us when we get low in water in our body, we start cramping up, and all of a sudden we start, our efficiency starts going down. So that's one thing I've seen. And number two, it helps on photosynthesis. So that's another big benefit out of it. So the manganese was some kind of a surprising discovery for us on our farm. And and we're still learning, guys, on these levels. That's why we're, it seems like about every year or two we change our nutrient levels that we want to be in the plant, just because of what we see and by testing on our farm. And that's part of the reason why we want you guys to do that on your farm too. You should be, 1 or 2 nutrients every year. You should be pushing to the utmost limit. I don't know what the limit is on manganese yet, but boron and zinc, we know, anytime you get above 225 on the zinc, you're going to start doing some issues. You get over 250 on boron, you're going to start doing some pretty serious damage. So I think that's a big thing that everybody should be trying to see what you guys see on your farm, differences on nutrients there. But so yeah, manganese, that's we get in that V10, we're getting into the heat of the summer and getting into pollination and huge nutrient pull. So so now that's mandatory. We want our manganese. I don't know, what is it, 140? I think we said 120, 140. I want my manganese to be at all time or something.
Thanks.
No low. Do what?
I think that's right.
Yeah, I'd have to look again on it. It's been a little bit since I looked at our numbers there, but I think that's where we want to be at now. And heck, I think we were at 80 before. So, I feel pretty confident in having that manganese up there that high. Will gain us bushels. Are you confident that most herbicide programs are compatible with the sugar and humics that you are using? As far as I know, yes. I've not heard anybody having any issues with the sugar and humics that we're using. And as far as I know, Joe, I mean, have you had anybody call in and say that they've had any issues with the
No,
sugar and humics mixing?
no, we've had no problems. The only thing I would caution anybody on is some of those dry chemicals. Make sure you have them dissolved and put it in the tank before you add any of the other things, of course, but you kind of known that for years. But no, we haven't had any mixing issues.
I've not heard of anything on that. Members make several spray passes over the top or over the crop. How much sugar and humic should they be applying each pass? So, anything foliar, I'm saying a herbicide or fungicide, we'll go a quart and a quart, so fungicides, herbicides, we're running at least a quart and a quart of each one.
Yeah, guys,
So-
you all on your sugars, you always want to find out what the percent sugar is, because I think Joe's sugar product is a 55%. He's got another one with some N in it. It's probably, what is that, Joe? Maybe only 30. The QLF maybe is a 30. Like I said, it's not how much you're putting on, it's what percent sugar it is. So that's one thing you always want to be aware of.
Yeah. So any questions about anything so far, guys? Okay. You guys are being awfully quiet today. So why do I feel boron is so important? You recommend throughout the season to use gallons wise. So there's several reasons with boron. So number one is, if you look the way the nutrients get broke down in the plant, the very first one to make the plant efficient is boron. So it starts with boron. Do you have that slide there, Joe?
I'm
I
looking
don't know
for
if
it.
you do. Okay. But if you look at the sequences, boron is the very first nutrient that gets broke down. So if you're low on boron, guess what? You're already hampering the efficiency of the plant. So that's why one reason we say boron's so important. Number two, if you go into pollen, pollen or pollinating, if you don't apply boron, your number's about 8 to 10. I haven't even really seen numbers above 10 without putting any boron out there. So we'll just say roughly around 8. We see a couple things. One is, your pollen shed, you will throw about, if you get above 40 on your pollen compared to 8, you'll have about twice as much, maybe 3 times as much pollen out there. And not only is that much more pollen, but it will be a lot more viable pollen for that plant. So one, you get more pollen shed. Number two, or on the pollinating, you will get a longer window of pollination. So if you're going through you got a rough weather coming and you're getting ready to pollinate, if you have your boron number up higher, you can buy 4 to 5 more days pollen shed, and hopefully that can, that might get you to another rain to help ease the stress, and you can gain more bushels by that. So those are the big things. And it does help a little bit on, naturally, if it makes sense, if you want test weight, if boron is the number one first nutrient to break down the sequence of nutrition. If you have higher boron, that will actually help you on your test weight too. So there's I think this was Rob Walker's farm.
Yeah.
That's where the left ear was the one that he added boron, and then the right one was where he didn't. You know, the white kernels that you see there on the one on the right are the kernels that he's for sure going to abort. So makes a huge difference on the boarding too on the corn. Keeping kernels, making kernels. So boron is big. You recommend strip tilling and even injecting some products below the surface before planting, and why? So if I farmed in a place that didn't have the flooding or the bad, super saturation, I would probably strip till quite a bit of my nutrients just so I keep it off the planter. But the reason we like what we're doing with the planter and the wide drop twice is because of the flooding issues. It saves it spreads our risk out a little bit. So say we plant May 1st and we get a flood May 10th, at least I can keep that fertility of the first wide drop and the second wide drop back, because if it gets wiped out, I can save that money. But if I'm in a good climate where I can do that, yeah, you darn right I would do that. I would strip till some of them nutrients in the ground before planting. Just the main reason is just so I wouldn't have to carry it on the planter. We are carrying quite a bit of stuff on the planter, but help lighten the load on the planter a little bit. So number 3, are we considering use some of the Phycoterra? Absolutely. I think I don't know if we're going to go, Joe, are we going 2x2 and then wide dropping? The last one, I think that's what we decided, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I think Cassidy gonna be on today.
Yeah, at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so she can kind of get into that a little bit more, the reason why, but I think it's something to help. I think it can help feed the microbes a little bit longer than just the sugar by itself. So we're going to try. We're probably going to run maybe 10 to 15% of our acres this year with it. We've seen a pretty decent little yield bump last year. But we're going to test it several years here before we 100% recommend throwing that in for everybody. So, and I recommend everybody try a little bit of it just to see. I mean, the thing different between that and the bugs in the jug, this stuff will be more viable because I guess it's kind of dead already. Ain't that right, Joe? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like a living organism.
right. Correct.
So number 4, I know you're against adding microbes at planting. For many of the MACC members, first has not used litters or their soil biology is in very low numbers due to high salts. Do you think experimenting with adding some microbes might help jumpstart the process of healing the soil? So I do believe that. I'm not against that for guys that don't have the manures that have heavy salts, but just in my opinion, use it as a supplement. It's, the thing about it is what we've ever used, we've never been able to test those same bugs back in our soil for the next year. So don't think what you're going to put down there is going to miraculously, I mean, if it would, that would be great, but is going to stay in the natural habitat of your soil. So it's going to be something every year you're going to be putting down until you get your own biology back up, built back the way it is. So yes, I do say I'm not 100% opposed to that, but just keeping in mind in the back of your head, it's probably not going to be, I think as far as ROI, 5-10 years down the road, I still think it's going to be better to keep on trying to build your own biology. And it should, the funny thing is I went to Dr. Belo. I had a meeting with Dr. Belo, was at Dr. Fred Belo. If some of you guys don't know him, he's University of Illinois professor, and U of I was doing a test on Pivot Bio. And if you see from the Corn Warriors or our show Live to Farm, me or Brooks does not push Pivot Bio. We never have. And I'm not saying it's a product that is specific for certain farms. I think it helps, but the problem is it is a living, breathing bug, and the 3 weeks of saturation that we normally go through every year has a tendency to kill them off. So that's kind of the reason why I think that we've never seen a benefit out of it. Now, I think guys that have less rainfall, lighter soils where you do get a rain event, boom, it don't say saturated, you can get oxygen back in the soil right away. I think that's going to help the bugs, any type of bugs there. But anyway, back on the U of I study, they were talking about where they ran the Pivot Bio by itself, and in Illinois, they got pretty heavy soils there. They really didn't see a benefit of it. But the interesting thing is where they added sugar to it, they were seeing about an 8 to 10 bushel increase. So my question was to them was it the 8 to 10 bushel that they were getting from the Pivot Bio or with the sugar, or was it the 8 to 10 bushel that they were getting from the sugar feeding all the biology? So, my opinion is I think it's the biggest boost why they seen an 8 to 10 bushel is because the sugar fed all the biology, not just the Pivot Bio. So, but one thing in common, even with the Pivot Bio, they should seen a benefit with the sugar. So if you do run some bugs in a jug, be sure to run sugar with it. I think that's going to help you a lot more too. Just don't run the bugs in a jug and just forget it. Make sure you add some sugar in there to help feed that biology in there. So, any other questions on that? We'll go to number 5. If members are not comfortable to stop using dry fertilizer, then what would you recommend percentage wise to reduce their application, especially P and K and even nitrogen? Well, the nitrogen, 100%, there should be no questions. The dry to liquid will not be an issue. If you're going to run, if you're broadcasting 200 pounds of urea, with the Y drops and the humic acids, you should be able to cut that back to 160 and not think anything about it, just because you're placing it where it needs to be. And you're making multiple applications, so you're spreading that out. So I have zero issues with that. But on the P and K, if guys are scared about it, to me, naturally, I want to see you drop it all, run no dry, no liquid. But just remember the amount of P and K that you put out there dry is going to hamper a little bit of the benefits of the liquid, as far as the salts, what I'm saying. So what may take you 4 years to remediate your soils may take you 6 to 7 years, just because of adding that salt. So, as far as a percentage, I don't know. I can't really put a percentage number on it, but, if it would be me, I would be weaning off from what we can see from our tissue samples, soil samples, and the other guys' soil samples and tissue samples. that's proof that you can wean off and still be good, guys. You're just going to get that healing process going a little bit faster if you can wean it off ASAP. So I don't know if that's the answer you want to hear, but if you are going to put, if you are going to use dry fertilizer yet, put it on in the fall. At least you can get through the winter and maybe get some of the salts get flushed out through the winter, hopefully. So like I said, if you're going to do it, don't wait till spring to put your dry stuff on. Put it on in the fall to try to get at least some of the salts flushed out. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but anyway, is anyone pre-mixing products together before planting, then adding it to their nitrogen, like boron plus zinc plus manganese or other products? If so, please tell us. So do you mean like mixing boron, zinc, and manganese in one tote or in one tank and having it over winter? Is that the question?
Yeah, well, yes, it is, but the other, mainly, you don't really want to do it that far ahead, but prior to planting, because a lot of them don't have the means to take totes and totes of each one of these products to the field. They'd like to have it combined together. I know we've got a couple of members that are mixing half carbon and half sugar right before, I'd say within 2, 3, 4 weeks of planting, and they love that because that way they've got the pre-mixed already. I was curious if anybody was mixing some of the micronutrients together. We have done some at the office. Boron and zinc, I believe, do fine. I just don't know how long ahead of time you can do that, especially if it's involved with temperatures. But prior to planting, some of these products can be blended together. If anybody's done it or are doing it and can tell us, I mean, it'd be great to know. There's somebody in the chat room now. Let's see what they say.
Okay. So we had a question to come in. What is a good example of liquid program that replaces a typical dry program? Say maybe 100 pound of 1846O, 200 pound of 0060, 5 gallons of 1034O. The program that we put out there will be better than that program. I'm confident. You know, our program of our in-furrow and our 2x2 will be better than what yeah, click that on, Joe. So this program here will be, you know, I feel 100% more confident in this than that dry program there.
Yeah, this is a very
know,
important. Yeah, this is a very important slide for you guys. So, you know, you might want to take a screenshot of it, or Joe will send it later on in an email.
So the only thing that I see that I'm going to change on this, I know it's in blue that we changed, but we're going to run on the instead of the potassium acetate. Last year we ran KTS, and I tried potassium acetate like 4 or 5 years ago, and you know, I didn't see the results on the K levels as what I did with the KTS before, so I went back to KTS. But I think now I'm going to change the potassium acetate back to the low salt replacer that Bonnie's has of the 40020. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah.
Their new their potassium sulfur source. I'm just afraid that I won't have enough sulfur to get me where I need to be on my first Y drop or 2x2. So I don't know. I mean, that the Y drop is going to depend on 100% off of what my tissue samples say. So if my tissue samples are good, you know, I'm up to, say I'm at V, you know, V6, or well, no. Say I get my first two tissue samples back, and my sulfur is on my second tissue sample. Say I'm above, 0.5, 0.6 on my sulfur, then I probably will use potassium acetate for my first Y drop. But if I'm below that, I will probably run that 40020 or 4020, I meant, source for my potassium. So,
Kevin, you might speak about what we used to use, and a lot of guys may still be using the KTS, the commodity product KTS, and tell them why you're getting away from that.
well, yeah, we
Cool.
used to use KTS, and the reason we're getting away from it, especially for you guys up north, is mixing issues. With the high salt product, we don't like salt, but at that time we were having, some of our best tissue samples with that form of potassium. Well, our program has changed a little bit, so that's kind of why I thought, well, we'll just switch back to a low salt, different source, just to see if we can, one, mix better, which it will, which I normally don't plant super early, so I really don't have a mixing issue as far as salting out, but I know it will help with the mixing issue, especially you guys up north that are cooler. Number two, I was getting a sulfur source, enough sulfur that I really didn't have to apply any ATS late in the season on my last Y drop, but we're just looking for a new way to bring our K levels up a little bit, and we're hoping that the way we're feeding more and more sugar and stuff, that we're hoping we can maintain a higher K level through that R2, R3, and maybe retain a few more kernels than what we normally do. So that's in a nutshell the reason why I'm switching from KTS there. Really two reasons, the salt and the mixing issues.
We're going to go about 10 more minutes here, and then we're probably going to break for lunch. And so you want to get through the next 10 minutes here.
Here's Jason Taylor's got a question.
Okay. I bought and have farmed this ground for 1 year. These are some of the better soils I own. I would try for 300 bushel corn on the north two patches in 2023. Previous crop was 62 bushel beans. I've already spread 150 pounds of DAP, 100 pounds of potash for 2023. I normally side dress 170 pounds of nitrogen or anhydrous. Any prescription is greatly appreciated. Let's see. So one, pH, when was this pulled? December 9th. So he's going to be a little acidic
It was 2021.
at planting. Yeah. So yeah, well, but even at 6.8, if you're 6.8 now, you should be about now should be about your highest pH in your soil. So, so I would probably, first thing I would probably do is throw a little lime, especially, which I understand the north two patches. I guess that's what that means, 1 and 2. That's probably why it's probably some of his better ground, just because the pH is a little bit better on that than the rest of them. But it's hard to recommend that what's just by what's on the soil, because we don't know what's getting released in the tissue that's available. So I'm just looking on if we can try to guess here. So I'm betting his K level is probably going to be low, a little bit lower with that higher base mag saturation of his mag. Calcium on the top two don't look too shabby. Okay, so see. I would still run, I normally side dress. Did he side dress that? I've already spread 150. I mean, I don't know if he put the anhydrous. He said I normally side dress 170 pounds.
I think it's after
He's
it's
already
up.
put the DAP. Okay. So if he's already put the DAP and potash down, I would probably still run my probably 4 to 6 gallon of your P and K, your liquid, the 924-3, and of your either KTS or your potassium acetate or something like that. Just because of I'm guessing with the high mag that his K levels are going to drop pretty hard through grain fill. But then after that, once you get into your first Y drop, I hate to suggest anything because we base everything off of what our tissue samples say. So, I'd have to say, Jason, you're going to have to give me a call after you get your first 2 tissue samples, and maybe we can go through it and recommend what to do on your first Y drop or your second Y drop, because if I don't know what's in the plan, I can't really suggest anything, especially with an ROI. But those would be the 2 nutrients. I definitely, even though you put that out there, I'm just betting you're running short on your P and K on your tissue samples to grow 300 bushel corn, especially with what's being tied up with the magnesium in your soil. So, Jason, give us a holler there once you get your first 2 tissue samples before you come back in and Y drop on that. Okay, so 300 bushel.
There you go.
Bought 4 and saved 300 bushel crop after replanting. A third of it in 22. This is my best shot in 23. Minor 3 for Shaw on west side for 22. So, like I said, number 1, I'd change. I'd get out some lime out there ASAP. And if your immediate goals, even though your lime, and I would be probably using pelletized lime right now, just so you can get the effects of it right away, especially for this year. That the problem is the lime does take a little bit on the regular ag lime, especially depending on what grade it is. But I'd probably run some pelletized lime out there. And actually the mags are a little bit better. The calcium's a little bit lower, but at least the base saturations of the mag are down a little bit. But I'd be running don't say what his CCs are, does it?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, yeah, there it is. So actually, with that high mag, I would probably be running my 2x2 and my first Y drop, probably a fulvic, a 50-50 mix with the fulvic and the humic, and then my last Y drop I would be making with 100% humic. That's probably what I would try. But like I said, we base everything, all my yields of what I fertilize is after really we do our first 2 Y drops and see our first 2 soil tissue samples to where we see our nutrient levels are in the plant. So I hate trying to guess on what to put out there just by reading a soil sample, because that's all it is, would be a guess. I can't give you a true scientific rate of anything just because of I don't know how much your soil will release of each nutrient. So, but I would do the same thing. I'd go ahead and run for sure the P and K, the 4 to 6 gallon of the 924-3 or the KTS, and I'd just run our whole program on it, see what your tissue samples do. then you can adjust from that on your Y drops then. You know, if you have a nutrient that's high, you know, you're not wasting money, especially on your P and K, it ain't going nowhere. You can just adjust or back off on the next Y drop. So that's all I can tell you there, Jason, right offhand.
Okay, you want to go to lunch, or you got, anybody got any pressing questions right now? We got just a minute here or so. Looks like we're going to go to lunch, doesn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. What, you got Cassidy coming back at 1 o'clock? Is that right?
1 o'clock.
Um,
Yep. Right.
Hey,
Right.
guys, I guess we'll go to lunch, and Joe will leave the it on if any of you guys want to chit chat to each other, or Kevin's probably going to go get a sandwich or something. I will too. So, okay, we'll see you in about 30 minutes.